First, spoiler warning. Please watch Black Mirror Season 2, Episode 4, White Christmas. If you haven't already, you will not regret it. Also, content warning. This has some strong themes. Content warnings in description. Black Mirror is a pretty fantastic TV show. I haven't seen all or even most of the episodes at the time of writing this, but what I have seen is some of my favorite horror media that I've watched for a long time. It perfectly finds that little nook between all horror, meaning no dystopia, and the generic police force ones you see constantly, and this results in episodes that stick in your mind for quite a while. Now, there are a lot of good episodes in the series that I could have done a video on, like Black Museum, USS Callister, Nosedive, but I ultimately chose White Christmas. I think it is the epitome of how all effective horror stories work, is incredibly disturbing, tense, and has great storytelling excluding the horror aspects. And so I figured it'd be worth making a however long this video is analysis on it just to look at how fantastic this is. I'll just start going through the episode chronologically and bringing up points as they come along. Anyways, put your phones on silent, Monkey needs a hug, and let's get straight into analyzing it. The episode starts in a wooden cabin. The outside is violently snowy. There are two people in there, Joe and Matt, who haven't talked much. I can relate to that. They've been in the cabin for... Okay, I can't relate to that. Anyways, Matt says that he wants to know how Joe ended up here. In his words, but Joe is just too introverted, and so Matt starts his own story. Before we get into that, there's some things I'd like to bring to light here. First off, how small the scope is. We can compare this to previous and future episodes of Black Mirror, but in those there was an immediate call to action and interest in the world that has been created. 15 million merits, this man wakes up in a digital world and immediately gets on an industrial treadmill alongside many others. Your mind immediately considers all the possible abilities. The entire history of you, people record everything they see and it can be recorded back. You're immediately thinking about the ramifications and how society could be different. But here, we have a small cabin, no apparent new technology, and nothing else to explore. And this actually ends up being incredibly helpful, not only because it lets the audience use their imagination, but because the main drawbacks of those introductions is that you're so busy looking at the world that you miss the characters in it. In White Christmas, you can't really consider anything other than the characters' dramatically different social skills and rapport with each other, aided by the nostalgic Christmas dinner and comfy setting. For this story, making sure the audience has a close connection to the characters is vital, because it makes the brutality and overall theme that more effective, and we'll come back to that later. But for now, let's look at Matt's first story. Matt is a dating coach. Him and a group of 8 other guys help people with their charm and get dates, and then kind of watch them do the devil's tango after, but let's not worry about that. The way that they do this is by enlisting a client, then casting what the client sees to a home computer. This is possible because everyone has Z-eyes, these implants that have the features of a standard phone but are with you constantly. And as the client goes through their conversation, Matt and his buddies will give tips on what to say. We'll move on to what actually happens in his story soon, but first, there's a lot to say about the idea. Black Mirror plays around with the eye technology quite a bit in the series. The entire history of you, Men Against Fire. I think the reason that eye implants work so well in a dystopian series is because of 2 facts. Implants create an immediate reliance on technology, and they're permanent. Humans naturally want to be independent. We want to know that the decisions that we make are of our own volition, and if we realize that we have been manipulated or are unable to make decisions for ourselves, for health concerns or abusive relationships, we get incredibly distressed. Having technology permanently embedded in our lives would give us the impression that part of our decision making has been taken away from us, which is a terrifying feeling. The way it's portrayed in the episode is also fantastic too. It's introduced without the characters mentioning or explaining it, treating it as though we would a recent iPhone. This really just gives a degree of realism to the situation and makes us think, yeah, I could imagine that happening here, which is one of the most important aspects in making a good dystopian show. Also, this is a throwaway, but you can now make connections with Mr. Musk's great Neuralink, which we all timidly make memes about. Next, let's consider what actually happens on the night. Matt's client is Harry, who is very socially awkward, just like me for real. He lets Matt help him pick a suit to wear, and then gate crashes a work party. He uses information the team found off social media to convince the workers that they know him. He picks his target, with want of a better word, Jennifer, and starts a conversation with her, helped drastically by Matt. Jennifer talks about how she used to use drugs, but doesn't anymore, and is also probably going to leave the work. She can't tell which voice to listen to, the one telling her to go or to stay. Remember that. Eventually, things go well enough with Jennifer that Harry goes over to her place. So, let's consider Matt's role alongside his team. This person is not physically there at the party, but he is in control of everything that happens to Harry there. What he says, how he gets in, what he wears, the structure of his conversations. Through the use of only technology, some random person is able to determine everything about a person in need. This immediately brings up the topics of honesty and identity. If Matt decides everything about Harry, is he embodying Harry in a way? Is Harry a sort of virtual avatar for Matt? Not only this, but Matt is in on their entire conversation. This is theoretically possible in our current world with recording devices, but with the Z-Eyes, this is more accessible than ever. He can analyze any expression of any person in the room for Harry's personal gain. So, back in White Christmas. Warning, stuff gets dark here. Stick to this time frame if you want to skip. Harry is at Jennifer's house. He asks Matt and his crew to turn off their vision, to which they kindly pretend to comply. Jennifer brings him to a room and gives him a strong drink. He has it, but it tastes pretty strong. Strong enough to kill a baby horse. Or a Harry. Harry starts choking, and Matt realizes that the drink has been spiked. Jennifer starts rambling on about how this will help with the voices that she mentioned earlier, and Matt realizes that she's schizophrenic. Harry tries to explain that he's not schizophrenic, but Jennifer doesn't listen and forces him to finish the drink, which she then has herself. Okay, Jesus Christ, that escalated quickly. There's something so horrifying about this ending, because of how out of the blue it comes. You'd expect the conclusion to this section to be focused around technology because it's Black Mirror, something about her realizing Harry's using the Z-Eyes, or maybe they malfunction, or something like that. However, I think that this sharp turn into a painfully realistic plot twist ends up being incredibly effective. It's a fantastic shock moment, and like any other shock moment, it adds to the story on rewatch, mostly in the scene where Harry tries to explain what Matt is doing, and Jennifer compares it to her own government hallucinations. Real technology is now comparable to a schizophrenic attack, and it fits really well. Black Mirror is comparing their technology to paranoid mental breaks, and the most terrifying part is that we are really close to this technology. We don't have eye implants, but we have easily hidden body cams. We don't have Z-Eye streaming, but we have microphones, Discord, and hundreds of conferencing apps. We have social media, which you could use to infiltrate meetings and learn the personal details of whoever you needed. With this segment, Black Mirror is saying our lives are at the point where psychotic ramblings aren't too far off, and this is textbook good dystopian. After this, not much happens. Harry is killed, Matt tells everyone to wipe the footage, tries to throw away everything, gets caught by his wife, and is blocked. I'll explain what blocking is when we get to the last third, but that one is certainly a doozy. He gets divorced because of this, and that's essentially how he ended up in this cabin. Now, we get the next little subsection. All about cookies. No, not this kind. No, not that kind. The existential dread kind. I guess those two could be. Anyways, it turns out that being a dating coach wasn't Matt's actual job. His actual job is much less morally ambiguous, in the sense that it's more obvious that he's in the wrong. This next story starts in the point of view of this incredibly rich woman, Greta. She's in the hospital waiting for an operation, and declines toast because it's not cooked the way she likes it, that monster. Anyways, the operation starts and she has an out-of-body experience, where part of herself is taken out of her brain and into this egg-shaped device we learn is called a cookie. A cookie is a virtual copy of someone that is placed in a virtual control room, essentially working as a servant for the real Greta. Cookie Greta is told about this by Matt, whose career is managing cookies and motivating them to do work. Into the analysis, I think the cookies might be my favorite Black Mirror technology. Virtual clones of people aren't the most original idea, but by the way that they are executed in this episode, it specifically gets you to feel for them. You can discuss the human rights of these things all you want, and there's definitely a lot of discussion to be had around that, but I think the most interesting part of this is that Cookie Greta is surprised when she's put into the cookie. What I believe this means is that when real Greta signed up to the program, she was told that a virtual copy of her would be taken from her mind to be able to make her living experience as optimized as possible. In the operation, despite it looking like the operators just took out part of her mind, this is a piece of machinery. I like to think of it as letting a computer chip marinate in the mind, if that helps. So yes, cookies are digital copies of her consciousness. However, this digital copy, being a copy, has all the memories, wants, and problems with being an eternal slave that standard Greta would have. This means that this Greta, despite being newly created and having next to zero experience, has the memories of being told that she would wake up to a newly created artificial servant, but became the artificial servant herself. This seems like a small point, but if you consider the fact that this technology is pretty accessible to a lot of upper class people, there have got to be countless times that this has happened. So as I said, Matt's job is to motivate Cookies, and the way he does this might be the most terrifying part of the show. So, Cookie Greta is naturally very angry about the prospect of her being a slave for eternity. Matt sets up a virtual room with a virtual keyboard where each button does the same thing, but Greta is still insistent that she is a real human and refuses to do any of the work. So, Matt decides that if she wants an alternative, he'll supply her with one. Matt plays around with the cookie settings and makes it so she experiences time at a much faster rate than in the real world, and so spends 3 weeks in the Chrome cookie landscape as a couple of seconds pass for Matt. After this, she is visibly less sane. She is incredibly angry at Matt and keeps a resolve to not be a servant. Matt, after seeing this inspiring display of bravery, decides to alter the settings again and leave her in there for 6 months. I don't think I need to say a lot to tell you that this is genius. But the first part of this is boredom. I have this saying, that a bad thing is better than a boring thing. Because I just want you to visualize this situation. I know that many of you watching this video haven't been alone for 24 hours, and many of you watching this video probably couldn't be alone for 24 hours. And that is because on Influx, boredom is one of the worst things for the human mind. Just a little bit of it is okay, but once you have too much of it, that's when it starts becoming a real issue. One of the most terrifying places for the human mind to travel is itself, and boredom gives the mind nowhere else to travel. Next is the fact that this is a punishment. This is a punishment for the Cookie Greta. When Cookie Greta doesn't agree to be a servant, she is punished, and so the fear of punishment will constantly go through her for her whole life. And that is because Matt's job here is to break the will of her without breaking the software. And that comes into play with the difference between our psychological minds and the robotic mind. And that's because at this point, the only difference between the human mind and AI software is the ability to experience boredom. Boredom does nothing to a computer. It can stay 4 years in a dark cave and then come back and be ready to work. But it absolutely incapacitates humans. Anyways, we can see how it destroys Greta. After this, Greta is begging to be put to work, and I personally understand her wish completely. After spending 6 months literally incapable of doing anything useful or productive, even slave work would be a blessing. And so the last part of this segment focuses on Cookie Greta preparing real Greta's day. She awakens Greta just like she knows she would. She makes Greta the way she likes it, and gives her a list of appointments, as emotionless as a robot. But then again, that's the idea, isn't it? Anyways, Joe is not thrilled by this. He believes that because Cookie Greta thought she was a real person, she should be treated as such. This is obviously a massive, very interesting debate, but there's more pressing matters to get to right now. Like how Joe is now drunk enough to explain what happened in his life. This is probably the most well-remembered part of the episode, and for good reason. Let's get into it. So, it's Christmas time. Joe is/was in a happy relationship with his girlfriend Beth. They have some problems, like Joe's tendency to act recklessly when drunk. Hey, wait a minute. But anyways, Joe and Beth are having a nice time partying with their friends Tim and Geeta. They're doing karaoke, eating some food, and everything there seems to be going well, and they're all enjoying each other's company. All except for Beth, who is upset and unfocused. Anyways, they go back to the house for a few minutes, and Beth seems to be having a lot of alcohol. After Tim and Geeta leave, Joe asks Beth about it, but she dismisses it, and Joe doesn't press further. Later that night, as Joe's taking out the bins, he notices a pregnancy test. A positive pregnancy test. He immediately goes to Beth, very excited. He can't wait to be a dad. Beth, however, is less thrilled. She is very adamantly not going to have the baby, to which Joe is confused and angry. They have a mini argument about it until Joe realizes that Beth has been drinking all night. Then they have a massive argument about it. Eventually, Beth has had enough and she blocks Joe. Remember how I mentioned blocking before? Well, here it is. And it is terrifying. So, this is blocking. It's like blocking someone on a phone where you can't contact them anymore, but now with eye implants. It makes their entire being a white silhouette square, all glitchy and with muffled audio whenever they try to speak to you. It also affects all images, photographs, and offspring, and it's two-way as well. If someone blocks you, they mean they can't see you and you can't see them. Another interesting thing about blocking is the laws around it, to which there are very few. You can essentially block whoever you want, whenever you want, with no legal repercussions. And of course, this brings a lot of ethical issues to mind. If your boss was firing you, you could block him and plead ignorance. If you were in a manipulative relationship, you could block them, they could block you. And ultimately, it brings a sense of control. This episode deals with control a lot. Matt having control over Harry, Matt having control over Greta, Beth having control over Joe. And it's this undeserved control that people have that really sets in motion the dystopian theme that this episode is going for. Joe is understandably incredibly angry at her, and also incredibly scared. So he decides to sleep it off and figure it out in the morning, and she's left him. Joe spends the next couple of days recuperating, still trying to make things work between them. After a week, he tries finding her at work, but Beth is being incredibly thorough. So, for the next couple of weeks, he only sees her again once. By now, he can see that she's still pregnant, having not gone through with the abortion. He tries getting her to take off the block, but it's just too much for little old Beth. Joe gets arrested, and his punishment is a legal block against her. If he goes within 10 meters of her, he's getting arrested, and her block now has legal backing. This only brings in more legal issues to the picture. Beth has no legal repercussion for this situation, and it makes sense on face value. Joe was the one going up to her, but that doesn't take into account the beforehand. Sure, she'd feel scared and intimidated and all of these things by Joe, but she was the one who forced the man who loved her away from her against his will for seemingly no apparent reason. Of course he's angry and upset. He was baited to be like this. Does this excuse his actions? Not really. But she has no repercussions, and is even rewarded by a legal block. I'll talk a bit more about how the system here is trying to keep the integrity of Z-Eyes and all the technology that they've created, but it's very clear in this situation that the priorities are closer towards keeping the technology straight than keeping the people safe. So, Joe tries going analog. He sends Beth letters, but she doesn't reply. He knows that every Christmas, Beth goes to her father Gordon's house. So, each Christmas, he goes up to the house, hides in the bushes, and watches her and his little kid grow up. A little creepy, but we'll give him a pass. However, like I mentioned before, a block passes into offspring, so they're blocked to him. Eventually, after a couple of years, he's able to tell that she's a girl, and leaves her gifts, like a kind of guardian angel, a guardian snow angel. So, he's been doing this for a few years, and is watching the news, but sees Beth there, and she's died in a train crash. Once the person dies, their block is lifted, so Joe can finally see her face, not only her, but also his child. So, he goes to Gordon's house with a snow globe to give her, and after all these years, he finally gets a look at her face. I'll just play the clip. This is betrayal. The entire time, Joe was trying to get in contact with her, trying to fix things, trying to change her mind. But she was lying to him the entire time, leading him on. And not only this, but the technology that she was able to get to caused someone who was entirely guilty in the situation to be an innocent bystander and victim. So from here, we're pretty close to the ending, so I'll just explain the rest. Joe follows the girl inside and finds Gordon in the kitchen. I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day is playing on the radio, and yes, that's a very important detail. He says that he wants to see his daughter. Gordon says that he has no daughter, and hankers him further into saying that he ripped up the letters he wrote before Beth found them. Eventually, Joe loses his temper and hits Gordon in the head with the snow globe, but this unintentionally kills him. So, Joe escapes from the scene and runs to the streets, where he lives for a few months. That is, until the police find him. By this point, Joe is emotionally unstable and doesn't want to continue the story to Matt. But Matt forces him to keep going, asking what happened to Beth's daughter. Joe says he doesn't know, but then slowly remembers a police officer told him. She went out to find her granddad. And then... Joe is now completely terrified and confused. He doesn't know what him and Matt are doing at the outpost, how they got there, why this outpost is slowly turning into the replica of the kitchen where he killed Gordon. But Matt still insists. Matt then disappears from the outpost, and it's revealed that this entire time, Joe was a cookie, and Matt was tasked with getting a confession out of him, since the real Joe was refusing to cooperate. Jesus Harold Christ! This is a perfect twist. No two ways about it. I'd like to clarify one thing. The 5 years in the cabin was just 70 minutes in real life, and those time that he experienced there was entirely digitally created. The reason that this is such a perfect twist is that the twist doesn't just fit into the story is built around it. There aren't clues for this plot twist. There are plot holes in the story beforehand, which are then fixed because of this. Plot holes like 5 years alone in a house, a lack of expedition, not knowing the job, this room slowly changing. The twist comes out of nowhere, despite making perfect sense. I can guarantee you that if you have watched this episode before, you did not see the twist coming. However, on rewatch, you get so confused about how you didn't figure it out in the first place. Not only this, but it works incredibly well emotionally. Joe is manipulated once again. He's betrayed once again. Matt is just doing his job like a desensitized psychopath once again. And also, this is classic Black Mirror. This is us realizing that we are far more reliant on technology than we realized. So, we can talk about the ending more, obviously, but now we have two specific people to get to. We still don't have Matt and Cookie Joe's ending. I'm just going to call him Joe. The reason that Matt came to the police in the first place was because he was arrested himself because of that seduction business he had, and he didn't report a murder. So, now that he's helped out the police, he's in the clear. Well, he still has to be registered as an offender, and so that means he's blocked. You're going to notice that I bring this up in the Joe ending as well, but this calls to mention justice. Matt was not a good person. He was a bad person. He had a moral compass that dipped all the time. He was totally okay with doing pretty horrible things to things that thought they were real people. He was okay with torturing digital beings, for God's sake. But at the end of the day, it was a job. It was a payment. It was a transaction. It was something that he was told to do. And so complete isolation for the rest of his life is too harsh. Currently, the average sentence for a sex offender is about 7 years in jail time. This is a life sentence of complete solitary with constant reminders of the life that you're missing out on. I'd also like to bring up how this is quite literally life-ending. Not only does everyone else appear to him as blocked, but he appears like a red block to other people. This means how's he going to get other jobs, commit transactions, just be a social person? I'd also like to talk about how this is pure situational terror. A lot of the time in Black Mirror, there are just the concepts that are scary, and the endings. But this situation is absolutely terrifying, which is great to see. Just consider the sound design. It's like screaming through a cushion, or like listening to someone else drown right next to you in the water. And that's constant knowing that you can't hear them, despite being right there. Also, the people there are glitchy and pixelated, which would give you migraines as well. But it's also just a constant reminder of who's in control. The final thing I want to bring up, it's poetic. The master manipulator is cut out of all contact with everyone else. That's kinda cool. And then we finally have Joe's ending. And we also, in this ending, have the scene that I cannot stop coming back to. Joe's fate. Possibly the most terrifying moment in Black Mirror. So, the police inform real Joe that his Cookie just confessed to the deaths, something that he is quiet about. But there's still the issue of Cookie Joe. So, they figure that since he is a part of Joe's mind, he should be punished just like Joe would. However, since he is a piece of tech, he doesn't deserve an adequate punishment, and he doesn't deserve human rights. He deserves more than an adequate punishment. In the cabin, they set a radio to play "I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day" on an endless loop. Whenever Joe breaks the radio, a new one appears, playing the song even louder. They also crank up his time perception to 1,000 years per minute and leave him on for Christmas break. And so, for that time, Joe is left solitary in the room where he ruined his life with the dead body outside the window as he slowly loses his mind. I don't know where to start from here. And when I don't know where to start from, I start at maths. So, Cookie Joe experiences time at 1,000 years per minute, which means when a minute passes in the real world, he experiences 1,000 years of time. Let's assume that they start Cookie Joe's torment at 5 PM, then leave him on for Christmas break, then come back at 9 PM the next day. That's 24 hours plus 16 hours, that's 40 hours of real time, which is the same as 2,400 minutes in real time, because that's 40 times 60. So, that's 2,400 minutes times 1,000 years. That gives you 2,400,000 years of loneliness. I'm going to put that into perspective. That's like living in a solitary room for Cleopatra's birth to the modern day 1,000 times, then still having to go from when Homo sapiens first evolved in Africa to now, with absolutely nothing to do. Boredom is hell. That's a common theme in this episode. Boredom and power. When Matt was getting Greta to do what he wanted her to do, he was restricted. But this justice system can do whatever it wants. Not only this, but Joe is left in that room guilty, knowing that he killed 2 people. Like I said before, the most terrifying place for the human mind to go is itself, especially when that place is full of guilt. In my mind, there's a period where he panics, a period where he's guilty about his actions, and then the period where he's lost his mind and is just incapacitated. And I don't know about you, but the most terrifying part of this entire fate for me is that he will go through that 2.4 million years of solitary immortality, and it'll end after that 2.4 million years. Next I want to talk about is justice, with quotation marks. This system considers all wrongs to be equally wrong. Now, when Joe killed Gordon, he lashed out in anger. And obviously he wasn't a perfect person, but he was given a fate more than 10,000 times worse than a life sentence. This system has complete control over technology which everyone is forced to rely on. And if you don't rely on it, then you're not really living. And there are very few laws around the ZIs and cookies. So, if it considers they can be used as punishment, it can just do that, without any repercussions to itself. We can talk about more on this later, with the 2 questions that I'm about to pose, but for now, that's the end of the episode. Like all other Black Mirrors, it ends on a devastatingly bleak note that fills you with way more questions than you feel it should. But there are 2 questions, the ones I mentioned before, that I want to bring up before the end of the video. First, was Joe guilty? Yes, he did kill a guy and indirectly kill a child, but did we expect different from him, seeing how he was treated? His wife left him, seemingly randomly. She left because she didn't want the baby, then changed her mind but still left him. He was then arrested after he tried to get her to change her mind about him after changing her mind about the baby. And after that was just forced to never be able to see her again after the legal repercussions. Then he learns that she was lying the entire time and only knows this after her death, and that all contact with her was stopped by outside forces. While grieving, the person physically closest to him was, in his eyes, cold-hearted and cruel. Obviously, the child death was unintended and he was probably not legally responsible, but I'd even argue that Gordon's death was closer to manslaughter. He was tortured. Joe was pushed. He was borderline tempted into murdering that man. Now, I'm not condoning his actions at all. Killing someone is never a good thing. I don't think I need to say that very many times. That does mean that Joe wasn't as guilty as the system considered him to be, which makes the 2.4 million years even worse. The next thing I want to bring up, and the final thing, is the theme. What is the theme? If I were to take a guess, I'd say the theme is about justice. Not justice, justice quotation marks, and how tech affects the consideration of justice. In this world, the mentality could easily be, well, everyone has tech, but technology is easily a luxury, so it could be ethically used to punish people, like how you take away an iPad from a toddler. However, technology that you rely on and that gives you everything you need, and is permanent, is literally hell. Having other people make life-altering decisions for you, like Beth did for Joe, based off of their mental state, is a bad thing. This also brings to mention that the legal system hated Joe, clearly, and so they're going to give him a much worse punishment than he deserves, like they did. Now, if we consider every person has their own life, their own flaws, and their own situations that they're in, casting away these real human beings because they did one bad thing is not only unethical, but downright cruel. especially since we got to know these characters' ups and downs. See, I told you I was going to get back to this. This episode focuses so heavily on building up the characters of Matt and Joe, which makes their ultimate, completely cruel and unethical punishments all the more effective and dangerous. Ultimately, to this legal system, people aren't people. They are assets that can be punished this way and that. Anyways, that's the end of my rambling. If you'd seen the episode, I hope this added a bit to the experience, and if you watched this without seeing the episode for some reason, I hope this convinced you to watch it. I really only talked about the plot, but there's also, every part of production. The set is great, the cinematography is great, the editing is great, the acting is phenomenal. So even after picking apart the themes and whatnot, it's still a very worthwhile watch. But that's all from me. Hope you enjoyed, take a break from the screen, cue the outro music.